This episode is brought to you by VPP Simplified. Now you can get element by element tracking and guidance for your VPP journey. Every aspect of the VPP requirements in one easy-to-use interactive spreadsheet. It explains every sub-element in detail, contains an easy-to-read stoplight so you can track current status for each sub-element. It provides you with a 3-step verification for completion of each sub-element. There's even a notes section for you to compile language that will eventually be used for your VPP application. It even comes complete with graphs to show current state and track your progress moving forward. Look, achieving VPP star status can be tough, but understanding what it takes to get there can be simplified. This VPP Gap tool will help you do that. Go to vppsimplified.com for more information.
Welcome to the Safety Pro Podcast, where we help you manage workplace safety one episode at a time. And now, your very own Safety Pro, Blaine J. Hoffman.
Welcome to another episode of the Safety Pro Podcast. This episode, we are going to talk about the OSHA Outreach Training Program. That's right, the old 10 and 30 hour card. We're going to talk about whether or not it's even relevant anymore in today's industry. We're going to talk about the pros and cons of the program, common misuses of the program that I've seen over the last 25 years. So, get ready. We're going to dive right into this one. Another topic request from listeners via email. So thanks, Chad, for sending that request in to have me talk about the Outreach Training Program. Hey, look, before we get into the topic, I want to take a moment to talk about Mighty Line Floor Tape, the exclusive floor tape and floor marking company of the Safety Pro Podcast. Mighty Line is the strongest, most durable industrial floor marking product out there. Their floor tapes, floor signs, and markings are made to hold up to the most rigorous warehouse and industrial activity. Look, go to their website, go to mightylinetape.com/podcast, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Going on the website recently myself, I was looking at some of their floor signs. Look, these are incredible. The floor signs themselves, they're great for marking safety areas. They come in a variety of standard options for you to choose from, so just standard stuff right off the shelf, if you will. But they also produce custom floor signs, even with your own logo and high-resolution image. They're extremely durable. They can handle the rough industrial environments just like the floor tape. And they have the peel and stick adhesive. There's videos on how to apply the floor signs, and you can peruse their standard options available to you. Look, if you want to mark locations for eye wash stations, fire extinguishers, first aid kits, directional signs for forklift traffic, and instructional signs, they have it all. And don't forget about the custom signs they can make. Again, go to mightylinetape.com/podcast to look at everything they have to offer. And hey, you can even listen to past episodes of the Safety Pro Podcast right on their blog page. Again, mightylinetape.com/podcast. All right, getting into the OSHA Outreach Training Program. We all know what it is. This was a program designed to provide employees information about hazard recognition and specifically the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. Now, if you go to OSHA.gov, you go to their Outreach Training Program page, you'll read the following information. This first sentence is very important. It reads, "The Outreach Training Program provides basic safety and health information and education. It does not fulfill an employer's requirement to provide training under specific OSHA standards." That is important. I see this issue all the time with contractors. Let's say you're a manufacturing facility and you hire a contractor to do some work. They're going to get on the roof of the building, do some mechanical work, HVAC, whatever. So you go through your regular process, I would hope, which is put it out to bid, look at a variety of contractors. You ask for their experience modification rate, what's their EMR. You're going to look under the inspection search page at OSHA.gov for their establishment, see if they've had any past OSHA citations or the open cases going on right now. You're going to ask for their safety records. In this case, they're getting on your roof, so you may ask, or you should ask, do you have fall protection training certifications for your employees that you're going to send out here? Almost always. I'm not going to say all the time, But a lot of the time, it's more often than I care to mention, I will get a response to the effect of, well, all of our employees have the OSHA 30-hour card. That's great. That's not fall protection training. Under the fall protection standard, there is specific training that your employees have to have. I want documented evidence that they've been trained. They've been trained on how to properly assess fall hazards, that they've been trained on how to properly don and doff personal fall arrest equipment, how to properly inspect said equipment. Do they understand what an anchor point is, what an anchor point is not, all that good stuff. You're not going to get that in the OSHA 30-hour. You're not supposed to get that in a 30-hour. And we'll talk a little bit about the topics required under the 10 and 30-hour program. But that is not compliance training. Again, as stated on OSHA's page, it does not fulfill an employer's requirement to provide training under specific OSHA standards. So when you get the plumbing contractor come out and you ask for excavation training, certification, or written documentation, or what program did you use, or when was the last time they were trained? Oh, they've got the 30-hour card. That's not subpart P under the excavation standard. That's not training. That's outreach training. That's above and beyond. That's after you've already done the training I'm asking for. Then you could do the 10 and the 30. So we got to get that clear right out of the gate. If you're looking for an OSHA outreach training program for your workers or your company, be clear. This is not training to replace safety orientation and other training that the standard requires. You still have to do all that stuff. This is literally voluntary, above and beyond outreach training. The outreach training program for general industry and construction, it provides training for workers and employers on the recognition, avoidance, abatement, and prevention of safety and health hazards in the workplace. And it's very general, okay? And we'll get into sort of if you're an outreach instructor, you know what I'm talking about. I was dual authorized. I could do the 10 and 30 for both general industry and construction for many years. I even chaired the OSHA Outreach Training Program at an official OSHA Ed Center. And I can tell you firsthand, the changes over the years that have been made to the program are troublesome for a lot of employers. It's really hard to justify the expense and time for the 10 and the 30 hour for my people when I can do much more effective targeted training that they can actually use on the job. We're going to talk a little bit about its relevancy anymore, and we'll get into that here in a few minutes. But I want to focus first on what the OSHA Outreach Training Program is supposed to do. It is just supposed to be hazard awareness and some recognition in some areas of hazards. It also provides information regarding workers' rights, employer responsibilities, and this is the key one right here. I'm not saying it's bad, how to file a complaint. As a matter of fact, 20% of the time spent on an OSHA 10-hour is on how to fill out a complaint form for workers. You have to show them how to do that. I mean, I get it. It's their right. But as an employer, if we're engaged and you have the right culture and you tell them they have the right to a workplace free of recognized hazards, and we expect you to report hazards, we support you in raising your hand and stopping work. That's what we're here for. We know what our right. The employer knows what their rights are, and you're engaged. Why would you spend 2 hours of a 10-hour training program showing them how to fill out an OSHA complaint form? I'm, again, not saying it isn't relevant or valid, but there are other ways to let them know what their rights are. There are more efficient ways, more effective ways, and then you can, boom, get right into the actual training they need to stay safe on the job. I'm not railing against the outreach training program. I'm just saying that the changes recently, and when we go through the agenda, may make it really hard for employers to invest in. And the next paragraph, it's very important, and they reiterate it. They say it several times. It is important to note this is a voluntary program and does not meet the training requirements for any OSHA standards. I have been involved in informal conferences as a result of alleged violations and citations being issued. And I have had employers say, well, we're going to bring the training records and show where we did the OSHA 30-hour. OSHA likes that. It's their program. But don't say that that's proof that you train them on fall protection or confined space entry, or that's not confined space entry training. You can't use that to satisfy other required training. So let's talk a little bit about what is required in the 10 and 30-hour program. Let's talk about general industry. The 10-hour program, you've got 7 hours that are mandatory of the 10. 7. Of that 7, 2 hours have to be done on the introduction to OSHA. OSHA has required training content for this module. You have to use their teaching aid. It covers workers' rights, the employer responsibilities, and how to file a complaint. It also has helpful worker safety and health resources. It also provides samples of a weekly fatality and catastrophe report, safety data sheet, and the OSHA log of work-related injuries and illnesses. So the big complaint when this change came out, it used to be 1 hour on the introduction to OSHA, but it used to be that you could use an example of your own workplace safety data sheet. And when this first came out, there was a lot of confusion. So OSHA had to backpedal and issue some guidance information for instructors, whether or not we could supplement the material with something like the one they provided. So, the fictitious safety data sheet that's in the teaching aid and the training material that OSHA says is mandatory, has nothing to do with your workers. It might be better to grab an actual safety data sheet, but here's the rub. You should have already done that in the HAZCOM training when you hired them or assigned them tasks that may potentially expose them to some workplace chemicals. So you've got to be careful. You can't just say, well, I'm going to use this to do the HAZCOM training. You only have 2 hours, and a fair amount of time is going to be actually how to fill out and complete the online or the paper form of the OSHA complaint form, right? So you're going to talk about their rights and employer responsibilities. They have the right to a workplace free of recognized hazards. They have a right to seek safety on the job. They have a right to talk to a compliance officer. You got to go through all this stuff, and you're going to have very little time to actually get into what you want to train your workers on that is relevant to them when they hit the shop floor. You're going to get an instructor guide, some PowerPoint slides, some handouts, and some participatory activities that you can go through. So that's 2 hours of the 7 that are mandatory out of the 10-hour program. So you have a total of 10 hours, 7 of which are mandatory. The first 2 are the introduction to OSHA. You also have 1 hour you have to dedicate to walking and working surfaces, including fall protection. So you have to cover walking and working surfaces, floor markings, signs, labels, and fall protection in 1 hour. So you cannot use this to satisfy the fall protection training required under that subpart. You're also going to spend 1 hour on exit routes, emergency action plans, fire prevention plans, and fire protection. You're going to spend 1 hour on electrical. You're going to spend 1 hour on personal protective equipment. And you're going to spend 1 hour on hazard communication. Again, I know what you're thinking. I'm thinking the same thing. Why can't I just cover our HAZCOM between the 2 hours of the intro to OSHA where I have to throw a safety data sheet in front of them in that section, but then I also have to spend an hour on hazard communication where I do what? Most likely put an SDS in front of them so they could see what the structure looks like in the different categories. But I've already done it under the 2-hour intro to OSHA. It's crazy. It's very convoluted. It's confusing, and I wouldn't personally have structured it this way, but that's the way it is. Having said that, no, you cannot use this 10-hour to satisfy the OSHA requirement to cover hazard communication in the workplace when you hire somebody. So now you have some electives coming up. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 hours that I just covered for you. Now you have 2 hours of electives. You must present at least 2 hours of training on the following topics. At least 2 topics must be presented from this list. So you have a minimum of 2 of these topics you have to pick. Otherwise, you can expand on those topics, but at a minimum, you have to have 1/2 hour spent on any one of them. So 2 hours on the following topics: hazardous materials, materials handling, machine guarding, introduction to industrial hygiene, bloodborne pathogens, ergonomics, safety and health programs, and fall protection. Those are your options right there. Then you have another optional 1 hour. Teach other general industry hazards or policies and or expand on the mandatory or elective topics that you previously covered. The minimum length of any topic is 1/2 hour. So you literally have 1 hour left to expand on any relevant safety and health topic. The old program, when I first got into this, it was 4 hours. You had 4 hours. So you had 6 hours that were mandatory that you had to cover, right? But then you could spend another 4 hours expanding on it. So, man, that 10 hour actually had some meat to it, right? You could make it really, really relevant. And when I used to teach at the OSHA Education Center, I used to teach the 10 and 30 hour. It was crazy. I would much rather go to a site, an employer, and teach their employees because I could really zero in and focus on stuff that was relevant to them. But when I taught at the Ed Center, I'm not kidding. I would have 2 drywall contractors sitting there. I would have a plumber. I would have somebody that's an HVAC technician. I would have a general laborer from a concrete crew. You talk about a shotgun approach to the 10 hour. I just didn't see how it was relevant given the training they were supposed to have already had that was more relevant to what they're going to be doing. This, I get that it's outreach, and I get that it's voluntary, but the position I'm starting from is the position I always see others start from, and that is I'm going to use this as training for my workers. 2 birds, 1 stone. You can't do it. You can't. The 30 hour. So let's talk about the 30 hour for general industry real quick. Mandatory 13 hours. So 13 hours of it, you have no choice, no wiggle room whatsoever. Same 2 hours on the intro to OSHA, just like the 10 hour. The same 2 hours, same program material, the same handouts, the same presentation that OSHA mandates that you use that they produced. You also have to cover 2 hours on managing safety and health. This may include injury and illness prevention programs, job site inspections, accident prevention programs, management commitment and employee involvement, worksite analysis, hazard prevention and controls. These are all VPP topics, by the way. And how to conduct safety meetings, supervisory communication. So this is more for supervisors above and beyond the minimum requirement. You can go to, the National Safety Council. You can get the Principles of Occupational Safety and Health Management for your leaders. They have leadership workshops. There are other programs out there besides the OSHA 10 and 30 that are much more suitable for developing the leadership of employees when it comes to safety and health, especially supervisors. This isn't a bash 10 and 30 hour episode. What I'm saying is I'm asking you the question. You have to make the decision for yourself. And please hit the email link in the show notes and give me your feedback, good, bad, or otherwise. I'm just saying, if I'm going to invest time, 30 hours in a foreman, and I've already got a very strong safety and health training program and continuous training and refresher training, and we cover all this stuff, what's the benefit really that I get out of the 30 hour? Or should I send them off to sort of Principles of Occupational Safety and Health or a POSH program or Frontline Leadership in Safety, something like that? Then you've got the next topic is 1 hour walking working surfaces, including fall protection, just like the 10-hour program. Exit routes, emergency action plan, fire prevention and fire protection, 2 hours. So we expanded on that, right? 2 hours of electrical, 1 hour on PPE, 2 hours on material handling, and 1 hour on HAZCOM. Now you've got 10 hours to play with the following topics: hazardous materials, permit require confined spaces, lockout, tagout, machine guarding, welding and cutting and brazing, introduction to industrial hygiene, bloodborne pathogens, ergonomics, fall protection, safety and health programs, powered industrial vehicles. I love this one. I actually saw a contractor once who said, I'm trained on forklifts. I've got my 30-hour card. And they spent, at a minimum, right? 30 minutes minimum required on powered industrial vehicles, or they could have spent an hour on it, maybe a half hour, an hour and a half on another topic if they only chose 2 topics. I mean, that's the thing, right? So actually 5. In the 30 hour, you've got to take 5 of these topics to cover. Who knows what was covered in the power industrial vehicle section of the 30 hour of the program they did, because you can adjust this. This is dynamic. You can mess with this section a little bit and focus a half hour on one and 2 hours on another. But you got to cover at least 5 of these topics for 10 hours. So you can't show somebody a 30-hour card and say, yeah, I can get in that confined space. There's just no way. So now you've got an optional 7 hours left. You can teach other general industry hazards or policies and or expand on the mandatory or elective topics. The minimum length of any topic is 1/2 hour. So this gives us a little more room, 7 whole hours, wide open for me. So it's already better than the 10-hour. But again, you go back to that first point I made. You cannot use this to satisfy other OSHA required training. So if I hire a painter and I have to cover HAZCOM, I'm going to say, I'm going to throw them into the 30-hour. I'm going to get points for a 30-hour card. I'm going to get on certain job sites that require a 30-hour training still. I'm going to satisfy that need, so I'll be able to bid on those big jobs at those big sites, those big factories, right? I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to use this 7 hours of optional time to just cover our new hire orientation. You can't do that. You're not supposed to do that. You can, obviously, because I've seen people try it. But you need to educate yourself. If you're listening to this podcast, you're a safety manager, a supervisor, or you're learning about this, you need to be educated on the program limitations. When you ask for proof of training for a contractor that shows up, you need to make sure that you're looking at the right training documentation. So let's talk about delivering the training. What's required in the training delivery? According to the program requirements for 10 and 30-hour outreach training, training that does not comply with the requirements listed will not be recognized, and trainers will not be given student course completion cards. And here's what they list. 1, students are defined as those attending a class. Trainers are not considered students. Therefore, the outreach trainer must not include their name on the student roster. Why that's even in there, I don't even want to ask, because it probably indicates that somebody tried that. If I'm an outreach instructor and I have had the 10 and 30 hour and I've had the industry experience, the number of years required in managing safety programs, and then I go and take the train the trainer course and the test and the practice delivery of certain modules, and I get audited and I get my outreach instructor card, why would I want a 30-hour card? That makes no sense to me. I don't know. It's just one of those things. Again, a pet peeve about the program. Contact hours, student contact hours. So that refers to the time spent covering course content, actual time spent covering course content. Contact hours do not include breaks for meals or other breaks or time spent on administrative matters like attendance or tests. So if you have a half-hour test that you give them, that does not count towards your 30 hours or 10 hours. You can give 10-minute breaks. Doesn't count. Half-hour lunch. Doesn't count. Contact hours are hours they're actually sitting there, standing there, participating in actual delivery of the program content. We're actually communicating, delivering content to the student. There is a daily contact hour limit. I remember back in the day, before this update came out, we would get asked all the time, hey, can you do a 10-hour in one day? Oh my goodness, that was a long day. Because you can't count, you were never supposed to count lunch or breaks, but it's like, man, that is a long day. So, training is limited to a maximum of 7.5 student contact hours. That is contact hours. If you throw a half hour for lunch and, I don't know, a 15-minute break in the morning and a 15-minute break, so what is that, 1 hour? You can't go over 7.5 hours of contact hours. 7.5 contact hours. So here's an example. The 10-hour class must take a minimum of 2 calendar days. The 30-hour class must take a minimum of 4 calendar days. The entire length of a training session may be longer than 7.5 consecutive hours, but must be shorter than 10 consecutive hours when adding time for meals and other breaks, and for time spent on administrative matters or tests. So here's an example. A training session cannot be conducted from 9 p.m. through 7:30 a.m. the following day, but may be conducted from 9 p.m. through 6:30 a.m. the following day. So that's the example they're giving. A 10-minute break is required for every 2 consecutive hours of training. That includes student contact hours and time spent on administrative matters or tests. So for every 2 hours consecutive, by the way, consecutive hours of training, you have to give a 10-minute break. Also, a 30-minute lunch or meal break is required for every 6 hours of training. Training is not allowed during lunch or meals or other break periods. This was also very common. Hey, we'll just order pizza in, and you just keep going with a training video, and we'll watch a training video for 20 minutes or so while they eat lunch. Can't do it. Not allowed to count that towards contact hours. No more than 10 hours of training may be conducted in a 16-hour period. So an 8-hour break minimum is required if 7.5 or more hours of training, including contact hours, lunch, breaks, administrative matters, and tests, are conducted in a 16-hour period. So there are some requirements. If you are going to do a long day and then a half day the next day or short day, you've got to keep in mind when you started and stopped the day before, if there's enough time in between. Outreach trainers may break the class into time segments to deliver training over multiple days, weeks, or months. But each segment has to be at least 30 minutes long. That's the rule. So I've had several clients in the past, years ago, that they would do this. They would say, well, if we do 1 hour a week over how many weeks, could we get the 30-hour done? Or even the 10-hour? There's some guidance on that. Bottom line, the outreach training program class, the 10 or the 30, has to be completed within 6 months of the start date. The training program, the training itself, has to include workshops, case studies, exercises, demonstrations that involve student participation and interaction. So a variety. They expect the outreach instructor, and the instructors get all this training in the Train the Trainer program on how to structure different topics and lessons to use, suggested activities, and we of course develop these over the years, being out there, and the more classes we do, the more ideas we get and things that we add to enrich the training experience. But there is an expectation that we don't just do this whole death by PowerPoint approach through 10 whole hours or 30 hours of training. Videos cannot comprise more than 25% of the instructional time spent on program training. So this is the other problem. I've had folks say, I've got like 4 hours of training videos that I can use. And I'm like, well, if you've got a 10-hour, you're not allowed to do that. Can't comprise more than 25% of the total time. So you've got to watch out for that one as well. This is a common question. Hey, I just got my 10-hour. Can I go and just bump it up to a 30-hour and just make up the difference? Do I have to do a whole new 30 hours? Trainers may provide 20 additional hours to the 10-hour students to get a 30-hour card under the following conditions. The same authorized outreach instructor must conduct all of the program training, the 10 and the additional 20. All of the outreach training program, the material, all of the outreach training must be completed from the start of the 10-hour class to the end of the 30-hour class within the 6-month period. The original 10-hour card must be returned, turned back in to the instructor before the 30-hour can be issued. Okay, so I just ran down basic requirements. This is high-level basic requirements. I didn't want to get into the weeds with the outreach training program. If you want to become an outreach trainer, you can go to the OSHA.gov website and you can look up the program requirements, trainer qualifications, and your nearest outreach education center. So that's one thing. You can do that. I want to shift the conversation to, given all of that, is the 10 and 30 hour still relevant in business today? Some would say it is. Some would say it's always good to go above and beyond. I agree. I've built a career on convincing companies to go above and beyond minimum compliance. No problem with that. I'm simply asking, is the outreach training program the best example of that? Here we have opportunities to go above and beyond, and I still to this day find contractors that present a 10-hour card or a 30-hour card when asked if they've had training on the hazards associated with the job they're about to perform. So that is something that, I think we should, as safety professionals in the industry, we should really be cracking down on. We should really be setting the bar higher for the contractors we hire. We should really be setting the bar higher than that. We should be influencing these subcontractors in a positive way and help educate them. We don't have to be condescending. We don't have to be arrogant. But we can partner with these subcontractors that we rely on to keep our facilities moving, to keep our project sites going. We can partner with them and help develop their safety and health culture, and just all of this whole rising tide, right? So we should be doing that. So I would challenge anybody listening, look at your subcontractors, look at the folks that you bring into your facilities or that you sub work to on your project sites, and ask yourself that question. Have they produced a 30-hour card as proof of training when they actually were required to do training outside of that program under the OSHA standard? And how can we help get that right? So that is the challenge for us, and it's been a challenge for me. I'll get people still want to argue with me. We spent 30 hours. You know how much that cost to send 6 of my guys through that 30-hour class so we can get these jobs, so we can bid these projects? That's great, but you still have to do excavation training for your people. You still have to do confined space training, and actually, if you have your own tripod and davit arm and non-entry rescue procedure that you expect them to do, they have to practice that every 12 months, a simulated rescue. You have to review the entry permits that have been completed at least once a year. I mean, you don't get out of any of that stuff because you got that little 30-hour card. Those are the things that we can focus on in our industry to make it better. So the question might be a little rhetorical, but yeah, is the 30-hour relevant in business and industry anymore like it used to be? Is it so locked down, so rigid that it really doesn't provide any value other than just on the surface touching on some of these topics that our employees probably already know more about? If we've done our job as employers, if we are engaged and we are striving for the best-in-class safety for our organizations, wouldn't they already have this stuff? So that's all I'm asking. I'm just saying that the 30-hour card is relevant in pockets of industry. I can still see a value in it. I would just challenge us to think beyond that, checking that box and saying, we have an OSHA 30-hour card for our people. We're good. So let me know what you think. Shoot me an email. The link is in the show notes. I always like to hear back from listeners. If you're listening for the first time, please go back, check out some of the other episodes. You might find more useful information for you. And you know what? Drop me a note as well. If you have a topic request, I want to hear what your topic request would be. I want to hear from you. Also, hit subscribe on the Apple Podcast app or the Google Play app or Stitcher or whatever you're using on Android users right there. And leave a ranking and review so others can find the show, and it helps me improve. Don't forget, visit mightylinetape.com/podcast. Look at all of the facility marking options they have for you to keep your employees safe. And until the next podcast episode, be safe.